What is turning out to be a pretty chilly night. At least that was my experience walking from the car to in here. As you know, we have a situation with our property taxes in Vermont, and that came to a bit of a head in the last campaign, where I think folks such as yourselves and a lot of people throughout the state, when candidates came knocking on the door to ask for their vote, they kept hearing, well, you got to do something about property taxes. It seems like that issue's finally come to a head. Education financing in Vermont. Since Act 60 came into being in 1997, the cost of education has gone way up. At the same time, we've lost a lot of students. So the Speaker of the House, oh, we've got some folks coming in now. Representative Van Wyck, nice to see you. So when people like Warren came to your house and knocked on the door, you told them that we need to fix our property tax system. We need to get costs under control. Well, you can't just change the system without fixing how you pay for education, how you deliver education. They're all sort of the same part of the same package. Today we're going to talk about education reform, and the solution to the problems that we're seeing in the state, I think, have been under our nose for the past 150 or so years. We've had a school choice system in Vermont for 93 of our towns since about 1869. And we'll talk a little bit about the history, we'll talk a little bit about what it means, what it looks like in the present, and what it can mean for our future. So I'm going to hold off on the main slides here. These folks are able to get their seats. Now, I'll ask people to be careful. We're supposed to keep this line open. It's part of a fire exit. Okay. Okay, it looks like everybody's settled in. So I thought I'd start out the presentation with this little cartoon that somebody from here in Vergennes sent around on an email exchange. And as you can see, it says up at the top, "Who wants change?" And everybody's got their hand raised. And then down below it says, "Who wants to change?" And nobody's got their hand up. And that seems to be the problem we have with politics and solutions all the time. Is everybody says they want something to change, but not me. I want that guy to close their school. I want them to consolidate their district. I want them, but leave my little school alone, or leave my big school alone, or leave my district alone. We're at a point where something's going to happen, and what I hope is that when something does happen, that it's under local control, and local people, parents, kids, local communities are the ones who are driving that change. So here are the problems that the state is facing today that we need to solve, and we want to put forward some solutions to. We've got rising costs in property taxes. Everybody is aware of those. We have a declining student population. Just since 2000, in 1997, when Act 60 passed, we've had 106,000 kids in the K-12 system. Today we have less than 80,000. So it's a precipitous decline in the number of kids that we need to service. We have a systematic failure to bridge the gap between rich students and poor students. Wealthy students tend to do better, and the poor kids who are on free and reduced lunch tend to not do so well in terms of their outcomes. The public school system has been trying to figure out how to bridge that gap, and they have, for decades, been really unsuccessful in doing so. And we have a rising need and the cost for special needs education as well in the state. It's comprising a larger and larger percentage of the total school budget, even though we have declining student enrollment. So just a couple graphs to go through some of the history of some of these problems. Rising costs. If you look at this graph from the Vermont Department of Education, since Act 60, Vermont's spending on K-12 education has grown from about $780 million to roughly $1.5 billion. It's been a pretty steady upward trend. But as I mentioned, at the same time, the number of K-12 students has been in decline. So the costs are going up, even though we're educating about 20% fewer children. And if you look at some of the numbers driving, why are the costs going up? It's mostly because of staff. In 1997, when we passed Act 60, there were 7,750 teachers in the school system. By 2012, there were 8,364 for an increase of 7.9%. There were 3,107 aides in 1997, 4,171 by 2012, a 34.2% increase. And so total staff goes from 15,783 to 18,482, a 17.1% increase in staff. Now, one of the arguments that you hear from a lot of people is that, well, when you have 3 or 4 kids leave a class, you can't get rid of the teacher because the teacher has to serve the kids who are still there. And I can buy that argument, but I don't really buy the argument that you need 17% more teachers to teach fewer kids. Let's talk about it. Rising costs versus stagnant scores. Let's put that together. This was a chart put together by the Cato Institute, and it shows that little dotted line that is going up and up and up and up. That is the percentage increase in the spending on education from year to year. So the cost of education, this goes back from 1972, but I put that orange line in there. That shows you where Act 60 came into being in 1997. It's a straight line straight up with the percentage increasing. That solid blue line along the bottom is Vermont students' SAT scores over that same amount of time. So even though you get that massive amount of increased spending, you're not seeing any difference in the student outcomes, at least based on the SATs. Another outcome-based thing that we can look at is the NAEP scores, the NAEP scores. This is for 4th grade math, 4th grade reading, 8th grade math, 8th grade reading. The red bars are the percentage of students who are at basic or below proficient. The green are the kids who are proficient or above proficient. So if you look at it from one way, the current system that we have is failing to educate children to the level that they need to be educated almost half the time. Those are kids who are falling through the cracks. This is a statement by Armando Villaseca, who was the Secretary of Education last year. He's since stepped down and has been replaced by Rebecca Holcomb. But this talks about the stagnant scores and the gap between rich and poor. He says, I'm particularly concerned that we still have not made major progress in closing the achievement gap for students living in poverty. Vermont students demonstrated significant achievement gaps based on family income. The smallest gap was 14 percentage points in the 4th grade mathematics, and the largest was 23 percentage points in 4th grade reading. That's a serious problem. It's one that we do need to fix. So what are the solutions to the problems that I've just outlined? Well, as I said at the beginning, and you probably surmised from the title of the presentation, it's school choice. School choice has been the solution that's under our nose because it's been here for almost 150 years. Through school choice, we contend that you can lower spending and taxes because you need to lower spending in order to lower taxes. You can maintain or improve the quality outcomes of the students, and you can be fair and you can be equitable to all. I call that Brigham compatible because we have a court case called the Brigham decision that says you have to be substantially equal in access to the tax base. I think we can go further than that. A little bit about Vermont's history. We have a 150-year-old history of school choice in Vermont since 1869. And basically, and that's Burton Academy over in Manchester. That's one of our privately run, publicly funded academies in the state. It's a pretty nice looking school. Basically what this happened is Vermont, when our public school system was coming into being, there were so many small rural towns, it didn't make sense for every one of them to have a school. So applying common sense to the problem back then, they said, okay, well, just take the money and send your kid wherever your kid wants to go. So you can send them to an academy like Burton, you can send them to another public school, you could find an independent alternative, whatever was the most convenient thing for the parent. And that has persisted today in 93 towns. If you look at the map, we have 93 towns today that still what we call tuition students. And this means that they allow school choice at some level, either the elementary, the middle, the high school, or a combination of the three. And if you look at the map of the towns, every town that's got a color is a school choice town to one degree or not, and the different colors will tell you if it's elementary school or high school or middle school or some combination. But that's not important for our purposes here. You can see that it's a large geographical part of the state, has school choice, but it only actually comprises a little bit less than 5% of the total student population is served by tuitioning. But the people that have it really, really like it. Just to show you a little bit about what this means, if you're a family that has school choice, let's look at the Northeast Kingdom. I just want to zone in, because the Northeast Kingdom, a couple interesting points about the Northeast Kingdom. One, it is the most rural part of the state, and the other is it is also the most impoverished part of the state. They also happen to have quite a bit of school choice in all of those towns. Actually, there's a couple in there that are school choice towns, but for some reason aren't noted on the map. But all those towns, and the grayish blue there, those are towns that have full school choice from kindergarten through high school. So you have a number of towns where they're feeding into even elementary schools and kindergartens. So your whole life, you can pick whatever school you want to go. So if you're a parent, and I'm just going to talk about high school, just as one example, if you're a parent that lives in this area, you get to choose between St. Johnsbury Academy for your kids, one of the finest schools in the state, Linden Institute, another academy, which is 10 miles away from St. Johnsbury Academy, another fantastic school, the East Burke School, the Burke Mountain Academy, which is a ski school, so if you've got an elite winter athlete, that's where you'll send them, the Cornerstone School, which caters to children who have special needs, and then public schools, the Concord High School, Littletown High School in New Hampshire, the White Mountain Regional High School in New Hampshire. So I know parents in the Northeast Kingdom that say, well, my daughter's really interested in nursing. They got a great nursing program at St. Johnsbury Academy. She's going there. I've got a son who's really interested in music. He wants to go to Linden Institute. He's going over there. I've got another kid who's, is in middle school who needs to be near where I work in New Hampshire, so I take them over to school in New Hampshire with me. It's wonderful. And these kids are finding educational opportunities that really fit their needs. In fact, just jumping ahead a little bit, there's one guy named Bill Storrs who is on the school board of the town of Kirby, which is a choice town. He also works for the high school that services the state prison system, and he's a licensed special educator. And he says that when you can get kids into the right fit at an early age, it cuts the need for special education because the kids never develop a problem. Usually it's not a question of there's something wrong with the child. It's usually that the child is in a position where they're not in the right fit, and you're not able to learn for whatever reason. It could be peer group. It could be the teacher's teaching style doesn't match the learning style of the kid. Nothing wrong with either one of them. It's just a mismatch. So you can find the matches if you're in this situation. Who wouldn't want to be a parent with all those opportunities? This is a popular, nonpartisan issue. It's wickedly controversial once you get under the State House dome. But when you're talking to just regular people who are trying to find solutions for their families and their kids, most people like this, overwhelmingly. Landslide numbers of people like this. The Friedman Foundation did a poll in 2009. I think it was 1,400 Vermonters. Scientifically done poll. They found that those familiar with Vermont tuitioning systems, Republicans, 64% of them favored town tuitioning. Independents, 62% of them favored town tuitioning. And Democrats, 65% of them favored town tuitioning. So across the boards, people who understand the system overwhelmingly like this system. Another poll was done just the other day. This was a national poll, but it also reflected on Vermont a little bit. Here in 2015, a Democratic polling firm called Beck Research did a poll, and they showed that 69% of American parents say they should have the right to use education tax dollars to send their child to the public or private school that best serves their needs. And just 27% of people oppose the idea. And their breakdown by partisan party was 60% Democrats, 67% of independents, and 81% of Republicans. So either way you slice it, this is an overwhelmingly popular policy amongst regular voters. So choice can lead to lower costs. sip of water. Here are the national trends. If you follow education policy at all in national news, there are so many states that are adopting school choice as a partial solution to their problem. They don't have anything, I think, as comprehensive as we have in Vermont. Most of their things, most of the school choice programs have to do with inner city schools that are considered failing for very poor populations or kids that are in trouble. They'll get a voucher. They'll means test it, but you don't have middle class people and higher income people like we do in Vermont participating. So we've got something very unique here, except for one place, and that is in Louisiana, in New Orleans. Every kid in the New Orleans public school system now goes to a charter school. They all have choice. It's a reform put in place by Governor Bobby Jindal, and it's apparently working wonderfully. But if you look at the costs, where charter schools exist, they tend to get about $3,800 less per student than the district schools, and that's on average, an average difference of about 28.3%. So they're spending 28.3% less to educate children at a level that actually has higher outcomes. Some of the more famous voucher programs around the DC voucher program is 41% of what the district schools would get. Florida, their tuition program is 34%. Louisiana was 50%. Milwaukee, the famous Milwaukee and the famous Cleveland voucher programs there were 56 and 29%. So people are educating students for significantly less money. Now let's look at Vermont, these 4 bars here. So going from everybody's left to right, the bar there, right, just under $16,000 per year per student. That's St. Johnsbury Academy, privately run independent academy. The one to the right of that, a little bit less, is Burton Academy in Manchester. The one to the right of that is the Linden Institute in Linden. All under $16,000 a year per student. And the two on the far right, that's the public school average. It is right there at about $18,500 average per student. And then the one on the right is the tuitioning voucher. So if you, I guess I should have explained this a little earlier, but if you get a tuition voucher, if you choose a public school, if you live in a tuitioning town and you choose a public school or a town academy, your town will pay whatever the cost is to go to the school. It can be $16,000 to go to St. Johnsbury Academy. It could be $23,000 to go to the local public school. It's whatever it is. But if you send your child to an independent school, such as the Sharon Academy, the Linden, the Long Trail School, the Mountain School at Wynn Hall, Thaddeus Stevens School, you get the statewide average tuition, which is just over $13,000. So the Compass School, all these schools are, and they set their tuitions, so that's what it is. So where kids are using tuition vouchers, generally speaking, it's 15 to 30% less to educate that child than if they're going to the traditional public school. These aren't perfect numbers, but they're a pretty good indication of how we're spending. So let me give you a real world example. And this is perfect because the Mountain School at Wynn Hall went independent, to use the term. Basically, it was a public school in the town of Wynn Hall in 1997, and it parallels Act 60 perfectly because Act 60 was passed. There's a coincidence, but it's a wonderful coincidence for our purposes. It was a public school that in 1997, it had the highest per pupil spending in the state for a K-8 school at $12,600 per student. At the time, the state average was just under $7,000 per student. So what they did was they closed the public school, they reopened it as an independent school, and they became a voucher town. So they were able to accept kids in with vouchers and send kids out with vouchers. So you had to actually, if you didn't want to be in that school, you didn't have to send your kids to that school anymore. 15 years later, the tuition is now well, in 2012, 2013, which is the last year I have a number for, was 13,160, which was exactly what the state tuition voucher is. They set their tuition voucher at what the state tuition would pay for an independent school. So over that period, remember I showed you that chart that showed that we've gone from $750 million to $1.5 billion since Act 60 came in. Their total expenses for education has grown less than 5%, whereas the public school system overall has grown at an average of about 5% a year since that time. So they can find ways to educate kids with less money when you're in an independent situation. Another example of this is much more recent. It is the Village School of North Bennington. The Village School of North Bennington, just in 2013, did exactly what the Mountain School at Winhall did 15 years earlier. And since going independent in 2013, the Village School at North Bennington cut its operating expenses from $2.1 million a year to $1.8 million a year, spending less money. And great quote from Tom Martin, who's the principal. He was the principal of the public school. He's now the headmaster, I guess, at the new independent school. And it's the same teachers, by and large, the same student body, the same principal. They're just doing it more efficiently because they now have an independent business model. He says, we don't have a supervisory union, administrative involvement, curriculum, resources, assessment, or technology. All those services a supervisory union provides for districts, assesses them for, and in a sense bills them for, they don't have to pay that anymore because the decisions are made by the principal and the local school board, and they are the ones who are the ones closest to the children and the families. And if you don't like that school, you can go. It's now a voucher town. So you can take that voucher, you can go to any one of those schools in the southern part of the state, and then they do have choices.
You haven't figured in the transportation costs they're having.
Can I talk about transportation at the end?
Sure.
Yeah, because that is a problem that people will raise. You know, how do the transportation costs work? And we have different rules for transportation in Vermont, and it can get complicated. But I will answer your question at the end.
Okay.
Thanks. Choice could lead to better academic outcomes. That was one of the promises that we made. There are 12 gold standard studies that have been compiled by the Friedman Foundation, and by gold standard it means that they have a random assignment, so you've got kids who go to normally what happens is because these are mean tested programs throughout the country, you know, it's poor kids in inner cities. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Lottery. You've got 100 kids who are competing for a voucher and they only have 50 slots that are available. So from a testing standpoint, you get a perfect way to assess a control group and a placebo group, essentially, is what these random assignment studies are looking for. So you have the same kids, same interest in taking the vouchers. One group of kids goes into the voucher system because they won the lottery. The other goes back into the public school system. And you can track the outcomes of these kids. And it's completely random, so there's no selection or anything, no cherry picking of students or anything along those lines. And 12 studies, out of the 12 studies, no study has ever found a negative effect on student outcomes. One study's findings were inconclusive. Again, a real world example from here in Vermont, the Mountain School at Winhall. I told you before how they were able to reduce their costs dramatically. I should point out that when the Mountain School at Winhall, they didn't go from 12,600 and creep up to that 13,135. They went from 12,600 down to 7,200 because that was the voucher at the time, and then have gone up like that. So they took a dramatic hit on the number of dollars that they got per student in that first year, and they were still able to figure out a way to make it work. But let's talk about scores, because you're going to say, oh my goodness, you've taken all those resources away from the kids, and it's going to be a terrible experience for them. We're going to gut their school. Well, before the Mountain School at Winhall was created in 1998, the public school it replaced actually had some of the lowest test scores in the state. That's why people were so upset with the school, they were willing to close it. It was costing them a lot of money, and they weren't getting any bang for their buck. Well, in FY13, Mountain School at Winhall 8th graders scored 13 points above the statewide average in reading, 16 points above the statewide average in math, 19 points above the statewide average in writing. So you give this kind of freedom to a school, they can do a lot more with fewer resources. Bridging the gap between rich and poor. Yes?
Quick question, back to, you mentioned New Orleans
Uh-huh.
a while ago. Are there no more public schools
None.
in?
They are all charter schools. Just within the city limits.
Right.
A tale of two studies here, talking about bridging the gap between rich and poor. I did a series of debates, the Ethan Allen Institute did, and I had partners in each of them, with the Public Assets Institute, which is sort of our progressive counter group, I guess. And they were terrific. We did 3 debates around the state. And Bill Mathis, who's a superintendent of one of the Rutland supervisory unions, and he's also does a lot of education research, and he sits on the State Board of Education, was debating us. And he kept bringing up the Stanford Center for Research and Education, the CREO study from 2009. And he said, this is the most respected study of charter schools and school choice that's ever been done, and they found that there is no difference academically between charter schools and public schools. And that is what the study sort of said. They're just about even. Bill Mathis didn't point out that the charter schools and the choice schools were doing it for a lot less money. They were getting the same apple for significantly less cost. But we'll take him there and take him at his word on this point. And it gave me tremendous satisfaction, but it was a little irritated that the Stanford CREO updated their learning in 2014, right after we finished our last debate. And what they determined in just the 5 years between 2009 or 4 years, I think, because I think their study period, it came out in 2014, but it ended in 2013, the data that they were looking at, that enrollment and persistence in charter schools is especially helpful for some students, particularly students in poverty, black students, and English language learners, all of whom post significantly higher gains in learning in both reading and math. And basically what the Stanford people found out is when they started looking at these charter schools in 2009, charter schools were all new. They were trying something that had not really been done before. And some of them did well, and some of them did not do so well. And the ones that did not do so well went out of business, because that's what happens in a competitive marketplace. New people were coming into the marketplace, and they're saying, I'm not going to do what that guy did because he failed. I'm going to do what that guy did because he's doing well, and in fact, I'm going to see if I can make it better. And that dynamic of competition between the schools, the charter schools were able to be a lot more nimble. They were able to change their programs so that they would benefit the kids more. And that is one of the things that makes it work. And not only is it making it work, the people who benefit from it the most are the ones who need the most help. Because, and think about this, you know, somebody, well, I'll get to this point a little later, but I want to make it now because of feeling the passion for it, is you get kids who really need help, and you go into a one-size-fits-all school system. And I live in Stowe, which is a pretty affluent town, and but we have affluent kids, and we have middle-income kids, and we have poor kids. I know that the parents that are there are saying, you got to put my kid in the good teacher's class, or I'm going to take my kid, I'm going to go to Rice for high school, I'm going to go Bishop Marshall for elementary school. They're the ones who are on the school board. They're the ones who are volunteering in the classroom because they have the time to do it. If it's one size fits all, the one size gets fit for those kids with the parents who are willing to do that. When you have the kind of opportunities to say, well, it's not working for my kids, so I'm taking my money and I'm going over here. That's when they start listening to you. That's when the kids don't get pushed to the back who really need the help. I read this book, I Got Schooled, by M. Night Shyamalan. And if anybody knows who he is, he has nothing, he's not an educator, he's not a politician, he's a movie writer. He wrote the movie The Sixth Sense, which is one of my favorites. I see dead people all the time. It's a great movie. But anyway, he is just passionate about the idea of giving kids a great education. And why aren't they getting a great education? And particularly, he's interested in how do we bridge the gap between the poor kids and their more affluent peers. Because if they're going to compete, they need to bridge the gap. And he wrote this book, I Got Schooled. Doesn't come at anything from a political standpoint. He's just a guy. It was a very common sense approach. He said, there are schools that are out there that are doing this. I'm going to go see what those schools are doing. I'm going to find out how it can be replicated. It turns out that every school that he found that was doing this was a charter school. He did not conclude, and in fact, he went out of his way to say, it doesn't have to be a charter school in order to do this. You can do this in the public school system as well. I hope he's right. But the 5 keys that he came to understand that all these schools were doing, even though they were very different in their approaches, though getting good results all, he said 5 keys were identifying and removing teachers who are roadblocks to student progress. You have to be able to get rid of poor teachers. That's what all these schools were going to do. If the teacher wasn't working for the kids, the teacher was gone. It's very hard to do in a public school setting. Transforming principals from operations managers into instructional leaders. All these schools, the principal was the person who had the driving vision for what that school was going to be and how the teachers were going to teach and the curriculum that they were going to do. It was a compelling vision, and they weren't just there to count the pencils and make sure everybody showed up on time. They had a compelling vision for how that school was going to be run. They collected data, and they had ways to feed back to the teachers. So, okay, this is working for the kids, this is not working for the kids. They did it on a regular basis. And they spent more quality time in school. That seems like it was common sense. But the kids who were in these schools really needed help to learn. And they spent more time in the classroom, and they spent more quality time in the classroom. And the last thing, I think it's an important point because we're talking about making our schools bigger, is they do all of this in schools that are small enough to make the other systems, the other 4 points, practical. Now, we don't really have large schools in Vermont. We have micro schools in Vermont, and we have medium-sized schools, and maybe in Burlington and maybe in Rutland there's a couple of schools that would be considered large. So I don't think that if you take a school of, I don't think when he says make schools small enough, he's talking necessarily about a school of 34 people. But it is interesting that we're talking about making schools bigger when small is not necessarily a bad thing. And choice can better serve children with special needs. And I'm not just talking about children who are living in poverty, but children who have learning disabled or emotional issues that they're dealing with as well. Just the other day, there was some testimony in the House Education Committee from Dr. Michael, I can't pronounce his last name, but I'll give it a shot. I think Gangreco, I think is how he pronounces it, but I probably butchered it, and I apologize to him for that. But it was all about how, and this goes back to the point that I made earlier about kids getting pushed to the back. He called it, special needs kids become the island in the mainstream. And he said, sometimes special education students who spend most of a day in general education classrooms might experience micro-exclusion. Even though they're in the same classroom with other students, they're isolated and they're at the back doing separate work. And this is one of the big shots that people will take against going to the, allowing people to go to independent schools and make their choices. Well, you're going to leave these kids who have special needs behind. Nobody's going to want to take them. Nobody's going to want to educate these kids because they're expensive and they're difficult. And the public school system is the only system that's really fair for them. And it's not the case. And this is the phenomenon that the professor points out here. What happens, yeah, they're in the same room, but they're not getting the same degree of education necessarily as the kids. Whereas if they have an opportunity to go someplace, we have 120 independent schools, roughly, in Vermont. Many of them are specifically geared for kids who have special needs, either emotional, some like the Austin School for the Deaf, they're people with physical challenges. Some of them are for people with emotional challenges or behavioral issues that are specifically willing and able to take and cater to these kids. And when you have that kind of an opportunity, it really works well for that child. I'll talk about the McKay scholarships. This is a voucher program that's in in Florida. And Green and Foster did a study that showed the students who were able to choose their school with a voucher through the McKay Scholarship Program, which was for kids with special needs. If your kid had a special need, they were diagnosed with something, they automatically got a McKay Scholarship, which means they could go wherever they wanted to go. And the kids that had that opportunity were significantly less likely to be victims of bullying. It's finding the right fit where you can thrive in an educational environment. And in public schools, 46.8% of the kids were bothered often, and 24.7% were physically assaulted due to their disabilities, is what the Green Foster study showed. And then the schools where they were able to choose through their scholarship where they wanted to go, that number dropped significantly to 5.3% were bothered, and 6% were assaulted. Still numbers that are too high, and I don't know how, I still haven't been able to figure out the number exactly of how 6% could be assaulted but not 0.7% aren't bothered by the fact. But it's two separate things. One had to do with just being picked on, and one had to do with being physically assaulted. But as you can see, giving kids that opportunity really does make for a better learning environment. But the proof is always in the pudding, and just ask the parents. And I wish I had time to show you this whole video. It's about 20 minutes long that we put together from an educational forum in Rutland. And there were so many parents who came forward. This was the House Education Committee, asked people to come in and give us your thoughts on education reform. And all these parents from school choice towns came in and said, please don't do anything to take away our choice. And a lot of these parents, if not most of these parents, were parents of kids with special needs. One of them, who I quote here, was Robert Treat. And he said, school choice is a great benefit for my family. It has allowed for individual needs to be met. I have one child with autism, and special needs require special fits. It has been extremely important, especially for him, to have the school choice to find the best fit for him. There was another mother who came in and talked about a child who she had adopted, and he was having trouble fitting in with his public school. She took the tuitioning voucher. She went to an independent school. And it's not perfect for him, but it's a whole lot better than it was. And he's got a much more comfortable peer group that he's able to interact with. I had another parent that said, his daughter was just in with the wrong crowd, and it wasn't working because of the peer group. It wasn't that the school was good, the teachers were good, but she was just in with the wrong crowd, and she needed to change. And she was able to take their voucher, go to an independent school, and find the change that she needed. And then she graduated with I think he said it was honors in her class when she graduated from 8th grade. So these are the kind of opportunities. And just ask any parent that has kids in this system. And school choice is Brigham compatible. What do I mean by Brigham compatible? We have a Supreme Court decision in Vermont that says all kids have to have substantially equal education tax resources in every district. That's basically what Act 60 does. It creates a statewide education tax, and it equalizes the amount of money that communities can draw on to educate their children. So a statewide school choice program would be funded by a statewide education tax system, and that meets the Brigham hurdle. I think if you have anything, I know a lot of people say, oh, just go back to let the towns raise their own money and educate their own children. Some people may like that idea, but that won't pass the Brigham decision. That won't pass Brigham's muster. And I would say that school choice actually goes a little bit further than Brigham in terms of the fairness argument, and that is it by giving a voucher to every kid that's essentially equal, with some exceptions made for special needs students who need extra care. It offers equal funding for every child. So I think that's even more fair. I just want to make a couple of points before we'll open it up to questions. Another solution, I'll put air quotes around it, that you're probably hearing more about is district consolidation, supervisory union consolidation, or even school consolidation. It's not going to save any money. And if it doesn't save any money, it's not going to lower your taxes. And this is the former House Education Chair, Joey Donovan here, and she just said in the paper, I think 2 days ago, maybe 3 days ago, in all of our discussions, I don't believe I ever said that this school district consolidation was going to save a dime. Certainly there were going to be transition costs. So they're trying to sell this to you as education finance reform, but it's really going to save no money. In fact, it's probably going to, at least over the short term, raise the cost of education because they're building in transition costs to that system. So don't be caught up in that. There is a school choice bill that's being worked on right now. It's going to take a lot of grassroots support, I think, to get it off the wall. It's being put forward by Representative Vicki Strong and Representative Mike Hebert. And basically the principles of that bill would be to fund students directly. So when in each of these 4 points, has the potential to save money. They will fund students directly so that when the student population declines, total cost will decline. It will empower principals and local boards to decrease the size and scope and the cost of the supervisory union level of bureaucracy, like what they did at the village school at North Bennington. They saved that $300,000 because they didn't need the supervisory union anymore. They took those responsibilities on themselves. This will give schools the power to do that. It'll incentivize parents to choose lower cost schools by allowing them to keep a percentage of the difference for the benefit of the student and put it into a college fund or a tutoring fund or something like that. Between the district, between what the tuition for the state offers and the tuition that the school charges, so you'll be able to save that delta. The other half would go into a fund to lower statewide property taxes. And I hope I've showed you the overall competition has been proven to reduce costs. So once we add that level of competition into the system, I think we'll be able to save some money. So I know the first question was about transportation, and I will go back to the Northeast Kingdom. There we go. So transportation, there are lots of different ways of transportation. This, as I point out, this is the most rural part of the state. It is the poorest part of the state. There's lots of mountains there. There's lots of snow in the wintertime. And all these kids are going to school, and they have figured out the transportation problem. It's an organic thing. I mean, I can't sit here and say, we're going to solve it by this, that, and the other thing. Some of the independent schools contract with buses to bring kids to their schools. Some of the schools partner with one another on bus lines. There's carpooling that goes on. There's use of public transportation to get kids to the school. I've never seen a story in the Caledonian Record or any Northeast Kingdom that says little Johnny can't get to school, so he's truant. It's not. I know you're probably used to seeing plans from people that says we're going to do X, we're going to do Y, we're going to do Z. But when you give a school the voucher and say $14,000 is going to follow the kid to your school, you figure out a way to get the kid into your classroom, because that's how you're going to make your money. And if you don't figure out how to get your kid into the classroom, that kid's not going to come, and they're going to go someplace else, and that's $14,000 that doesn't go into your school. So there is a tremendous incentive to get kids there. And there's also tremendous incentive on the part of parents. I've sent my kids go to public school in Stowe. We have a good system, but for a couple of years in the early years, I sent them to Bishop Marshall, which is a Catholic school. And parents put their kids on the little transportation buses for $1 each way. And we had parents who were carpooling all the way as far away from the Canadian border, 45 minutes each way to get their kids to that school, because they thought that was the best environment for their kid to learn in. So people are highly motivated on both ends of this dynamic to get their kids into that school, because we want your kid, we want to educate your kid, and I want my kid to be educated. They find solutions.